Okay, everybody, this is Joseph P. Farrell, and I'm doing some video blogs in this section of blogs that I'm scheduling for the next couple of weeks because a lot of you responded and said that you liked the format. So I'm going to kind of mix and match video blogs and written blogs from now on. I may be doing a lot of video blogs in the next couple of weeks because I've had some things come up I've got to take care of. So this will be easier for me. Anyway, I hope you like the format. But last night, to get on to our subject for the day, last night on the news and views from the Nefarium for April 26, 2012, in the year of the apocalypse, I was talking once again about the bearer bond scandal. And I mentioned Operation Bernhard. Now, I want to give some historical background in this blog about Operation Bernhard, and then talk in a couple of future blogs about what I think some of the implications of this operation might be. Because, as you know, in my book, The Nazi International, I've talked a great deal about my thesis that the Nazis survived World War II not only as a kind of enclave of people hiding out and running from justice, but more importantly, as an organized extraterritorial state, as an actual kind of underground hidden power, much like the mafia. All right. So Operation Bernhard plays into this story. I haven't written about this with respect to Nazi survival, and I kind of want to flesh out in these coming blogs, these video blogs, some ideas that began to occur to me. But to give some background about Operation Bernhard, this was an operation that was launched just after the beginning of World War II by the SS. It was placed under the command of an SS officer by the name of Bernhard Krieger, which most people assume is the reason that it was given that code name, which is true. This operation was designed in part by the Reichsbank and also by the SS to counterfeit British pound notes from the Bank of England and circulate these notes in an attempt to cause chaos to the British economy. What the SS did was it rounded up counterfeiters from the concentration camps, the most skilled counterfeiters that they could find from the concentration camps. And these counterfeit pound notes that they counterfeited were so good that it was very, very difficult, even for the Bank of England specialists, to determine the difference between the counterfeit notes and the genuine notes. They were that good. Now, this operation, the reason I'm mentioning this historical background is because we need to take into account some other things. This operation continued throughout World War II, right up to the very end of World War II, and the counterfeiters themselves used it as a means of escaping certain death in the concentration camps. They were treated rather better, not that that means that much, but rather better than most concentration camp inmates were treated in order to produce these counterfeit pound notes. The currency war that the SS conceived of here, it's very, very important to understand what they're doing. They're counterfeiting such good notes that what they're really doing is they're inflating the British currency. They're inflating the British pound. They subsequently, during the war, turned their attentions to counterfeiting American currency, American dollars as well. Now, the operation ran throughout World War II, and in terms of its ability to crash the British or American economies, obviously it was unsuccessful. It did not happen. But we need to take into consideration something else, and that is, why would the Germans keep an operation like this going for so long when it was apparently unsuccessful circa 1942, early 1943? And I think part of the answer to that question, and again, I'm speculating here on the basis of what we know about Operation Bernhard, and I'm connecting some dots to some other things. By 1943, by early 1943, with the loss of the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad, as I mentioned in Nazi International, it was clear to the leadership of the German military, it was clear to the leadership of the Nazi Party, particularly Martin Bormann, and that's a name that we're going to get back to. it was clear that the war was lost. And it was at this juncture, you'll recall, that the very first long-range strategic evacuation plans began to be formulated. And it was at this juncture, late 1942, early 1943, that the Nazis began to move strategic assets out of Nazi Germany via nationalist Spain, either through U-boats or through aircraft, then into Latin America, and particularly into Argentina, as I've outlined in those books, and as other authors have outlined. Peter Levenda would be one author in particular to look at in that respect. Now, it's my belief that we need to look at Operation Bernhard in terms of what it probably came to represent to the Nazi leadership at this point in the war. In other words, at this point in the war, the purpose for the operation probably began to change somewhat and began to figure into their long-range strategic evacuation planning. Because we do know, as I've outlined in the Nazi International, and again as I've outlined in Saucers, Swastikas, and PSYOPs, we do know that the Nazi leadership was setting up hundreds, if not thousands really, of dummy corporations and so on and so forth in order to shunt their patents, their license agreements, and so on and so forth out of Nazi Germany and into these holding companies in Latin America and other places around the world, Turkey, nationalist Spain, Taiwan eventually. So we know that this activity occurred. Now, in that respect, something like Operation Bernhard would prove to be a boon to the Nazis because the counterfeiting expertise that this would have afforded them would have allowed them to counterfeit securities for these companies, to circulate false securities, and additionally, and this is a very important point that we're going to get back to in some future blogs, additionally to circulate securities of other governments. All right, it would become therefore for them a means of further funding, and it would also become a means of quite literally bilking people out of money. Now, we do know in this respect, as I mentioned in the news and views last night, we do know in this respect that the Vatican Bank was involved during the 60s, 70s, and early 80s in helping launder false or counterfeit securities. And we also know that the Vatican was heavily involved in the rat line operations, getting some of these Nazi war criminals out of Europe and into Latin America. It was specifically the Vatican Secretariat of State at that time which was involved in this activity and providing Vatican diplomatic passports to these fleeing Nazis. This was under the direction of Archbishop Giovanni Montini, and that name should be familiar to many of you because it is, of course, Giovanni Cardinal Montini that later becomes Pope Paul VI and presides over the tail end of the Second Vatican Council and sets up basically the modern Roman Catholic Church. So it was Archbishop Montini that was involved precisely in some of this rat line activity. And it was under his tenure as Pope Paul VI that the corruption began to enter the Vatican Bank, the Institute for Religious Works, or IOR as its official abbreviation. So I'm speculating wildly here and trying to connect some dots that I don't think others have connected. And that is, number one, that Operation Bernhard's purpose probably changed during the war. And that number two, as part of that change of purpose, it was seen as an integral part, probably, of the long-term Nazi strategic planning. And therefore, that implies something very, very important. And we're going to pick that up in the second part of this video blog. That implies that Operation Bernhard probably continued after the war in some degree, probably scaled down from the scope of the project in Nazi Germany, but it probably continued to some lesser degree after the war. After all, I've outlined a case that the Germans were continuing their research projects in Argentina, which they certainly were with Dr. Ronald Richter and his projects, with the Horton brothers being down in Argentina building advanced aircraft for Juan Perón. So I'm suggesting that at the tail end of the period of the 70s, when you find the Nazis moving into collaboration with the international drug cartels, I'm suggesting also that there may have been yet another aspect of this hidden financial activity that we need to consider in looking at this vast bearer bond scandal. And that activity we'll pick up in tomorrow's blog on Operation Bernhard Part 2. So keep it right here, folks, and I'll see you on the flip side. Bye-bye.